You see the headlines about Iran, and it's just a confusing mess, right? Protests, diplomatic chatter, military threats. It's hard to know what's really going on. So today, we're going to cut right through all that noise. We're going to focus on one huge question. When a U.S. aircraft carrier starts moving, what does that really mean? So you're scrolling through your feed, and bam, there it is. A U.S. carrier is headed for the Gulf, and you can't help but feel that knot in your stomach, right? I mean, we're talking about an aircraft carrier, one of the most powerful pieces of military hardware on the planet, and it's supposedly heading for the Persian Gulf. The question is obvious, and it's the one we're all thinking. Is this it? Is war about to break out? All right, let's break this down. First things first, a carrier is coming. The reports are real. A carrier group is definitely on the move. And that is a huge deal. It's a massive deployment of resources. But the real question is, what does it actually mean? Look, it's so easy to get caught up in all the tough talk and the dramatic pictures. But if you really want to understand what's going on, you have to look past the rhetoric. You have to look at the assets. Do the assets on the ground or, on the water actually match what's being said? Is this a genuine preparation for a strike, or is it something else? Something more like a very, very loud and very expensive message. So to figure that out, we actually need to look away from the carrier for a minute. We need to look at the view from Tehran. Because a lot of the time, what's happening inside a country is what determines whether or not someone on the outside decides to act. So let's ask, what's the real situation on the ground in Iran? Okay, so if you've been following the news, the narrative you often hear is that Iran is on fire with these massive nationwide protests that are about to topple the regime. But the reality on the ground seems to tell a different story. The analysis we're seeing suggests these protests are actually pretty fragmented, kind of localized. They're not some big synchronized national movement. It looks like the real focus is on economic problems, things like inflation and labor disputes, not a full-scale revolution. And here's the bottom line. Yeah, the regime is feeling the heat, for sure, but it's not breaking. The economic pressure is real, but they're still in control politically. We're not seeing any major cracks in the leadership. So the stress level, let's call it moderate but stable. This is definitely not the picture of a government about to fall apart. All right, so if the regime isn't about to collapse, what's with the military moves? This brings us to the heart of it all, reading the military signals. You can think of it like a giant chess match, or maybe even better, a high-stakes game of geopolitical poker. This is where we have to learn to read the tells. And the key concept here is something called military signaling. See, moving an aircraft carrier isn't just about getting ready to launch fighter jets. It's a way of talking. It's using your military posture, your deployments, to send a powerful, unmistakable message to your opponent about what you can do and what you're thinking of doing, and you do it all without ever firing a shot. So what kind of message is it? Well, military postures usually fall into one of two buckets. You've got deterrence and you've got strike. A deterrence posture is all about preventing a war. It's basically a big, loud, don't even think about it. A strike posture, on the other hand, well, that's getting all your ducks in a row to actually start a fight. And trust me, they look very, very different. So let's look at what we are seeing from the U.S. side. Intel folks are seeing more ISR flights, that's intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, flying over the Gulf. They're also seeing some refueling tankers getting moved around. Now, these are the classic moves for what's called maritime deterrence. It's about protecting the shipping lanes, keeping an eye on things. It's basically a just-in-case setup. But what's maybe even more important is what we aren't seeing. There are no reports of a ton of fighter jets piling up at bases in the region. We're not seeing a huge influx of those big cargo planes you'd need to supply a real offensive. These are the dead giveaways, the telltale signs of a buildup for a strike. And right now, they're just not there. And hey, this isn't a one-way street. If you look at Iran's posture, you see the same kind of thing. There are no public signs that they're, say, spreading out their missile forces to hide them from an attack. You don't see their naval boats swarming. Their big air defense systems aren't lighting up. So yeah, they might be saying a lot of fiery things, but their actual military posture, it doesn't look like they're getting ready for a big war either. Okay, so we've got the military picture. Now let's add another layer to this whole thing, the diplomacy. Because this isn't just about the US and Iran. There's another really important player here we have to talk about, Israel. This is about escalation, control versus ignition. And what the reports are suggesting is that these two allies aren't exactly on the same page. The word is, Israel is pushing for more direct action, something kinetic. At the same time, the US seems to be urging caution. And this whole dynamic,
One partner with their foot on the gas and the other with a hand on the brake. That's a classic story in Middle East geopolitics. And honestly, there's a quote that's been floating around that sums up the U.S. position perfectly. It goes, "We want escalation control, not escalation ignition." Think about that. The goal isn't to light the match. It's to control the situation, to manage how things escalate, and to make sure one little mistake doesn't accidentally start a massive war. Okay, so let's recap. We've looked at what's happening inside Iran. We've decoded the military signals. We've even looked at the diplomatic angle. So now it's time for the final verdict. And for that, we're going to turn to one of the most objective sources out there, the global markets. You know, they say money talks, and it's definitely not sentimental. Markets are really, really good at pricing in risk. And right now, they are just not pricing in a major war. If you look at the price of oil, the risk premium is pretty small. It's not spiking like you'd expect. And maybe most telling, the cost of shipping insurance to go through the Strait of Hormuz, yeah, it's up a bit. It shows caution, but it's not panic pricing. Basically, the people who are betting billions of dollars on this stuff, they don't seem to think a war is about to happen. So when we put all the pieces together, what do we get? Well, based on everything we're seeing, the probability of some kind of major military campaign in the next, say, week to 10 days, it's really low. We're talking less than 15%. Now, could there be a smaller, more limited strike? Sure, that's a bit more likely, but it's still not what we'd bet on. The most probable scenario is that this is exactly what it looks like, a whole lot of very serious signaling. So the takeaway for today seems pretty clear. This carrier move looks like a really powerful piece of strategic communication. It's a signal, not a prelude to a strike. But that leaves us with one last big question. Today, it's about signaling. But in a place as crowded and as tense as the world's most volatile strait, just how wide is that line between sending a signal and starting a conflict? And that's something to think about.